Hello and welcome to this special edition of Tell Me, as we look back over the past 2 years' work of the Tell Me project and bring you some of the childhood memories of the older people of the Isle of Man as told to some of the school children who conducted the interviews as part of this groundbreaking intergenerational project. As we get close to Christmas, it's a good time to remind ourselves of how times have changed and how many comforts we have today compared to 50 or more years ago.
What type of meals would you eat on special occasions?
Well, special occasions to me as a child would be my birthday. So on my birthday, Mum and I, we would have a bake day and bake all our stuff. We would make cake, we'd make scones, and little tarts, and also we would have sandwiches made, which were very nice. And then come Christmas, which we were all excited about, we used to have a turkey and vegetables, lots of fruit, and we used to really enjoy our meal at Christmas. We never had a lot, but we enjoyed it.
What type of drinks did you have?
Well, the drinks we drank when I was a child was milk, and especially when we went to school, we had a carton of milk every day. Drinks like water we had, and if we were going out or going out with our little friends, we used to have sachets of fizzy stuff that we put in water and make sandwiches and go out for the day.
How often would you get sweets?
Well, not very often at all, because as I say, I came from a large family of 7 and we never had the money. So we would maybe go out with my ninny, which is called a nan today, and she looked after me, and we would have a little treat, and she would buy a bar of licorice or a lollipop.
What was the most common meal?
Every day we used to have to go out and shop for our food, which took us to buy everything fresh because we had no fridges, no freezers. In the home we would have a cupboard with a cold block, which was called a larder. So all our food would be put there for the day, and every day we used to buy bacon and our eggs, meat, if we were having. The most common meal that we would have, my father would have fish, but we wouldn't. We'd have like sausage, potatoes and vegetables, or we'd have some meat in the week, or bacon and eggs. Things were, very difficult in them days, so we had to fill up on homemade pastries and potatoes and veg.
What snacks did you have?
Snacks consisted of, as I say, cakes, all homemade, and sandwiches. Egg sandwiches maybe. But then, when you say snacks, when we were at school, we used to go to school dinners. We never had, packed lunches in them days at all. We used to have school dinners, which, became vegetables and good nourishing food throughout the week,
Can you explain what you had for breakfast?
Oh, for breakfast, every morning we had porridge, made from our fresh milk. And it was full milk we used to get, not skim milk or semi, which I know now today it's still the same type of milk. Then we would have, going to school when we did, we always had an apple or an orange.
Did you grow your own vegetables?
Well, not when I was a small child. When I got to 8, we moved to a large house which had a garden, and we did grow our vegetables. We had quite a big plot, with carrots and cabbages and onions, you know, and it was quite good to do.
Can you explain if you had any food from other countries?
We had an uncle who was a seafarer, went away to sea, and he did a lot of fruit in boxes, you know. Yes, bananas mostly.
What hot drinks did you have?
Well, I can only remember having Ovaltine of an evening. We used to have a drink of that, or hot milk, or we used to also have warmed orange juice. Yes, we did, every day.
Did you have your daily fruit and vegetables?
We had all the fruit you could think about, as my dad was a fruit merchant, and when he went to the markets, he used to come home on a Monday with fresh fruit, vegetables, and on a Thursday, so we were never without.
Did you go to the cinema?
Yeah, I went to the cinema every Saturday morning, or most Saturday mornings when I was a kid, yeah. We used to have matinees on, and we paid about threepence in old money to go in, which is just over 1p in today, and there used to be cartoons and a serial, something like Flash Gordon or Superman, with a different episode every week, and it kept you going back the next week to see what happened. Good fun, Saturday morning.
Was the cinema black and white?
Oh, it was all black and white, there's no colour. Didn't know about colour, just black and white.
Did you have a television?
Didn't have a television, no television at all, till I was about 16 in the very late 1950s, yes, no. And then it was a black and white one with a magnifying glass in front of it.
What programmes did you watch?
When I was a kid, we didn't have television, so I didn't watch any television at all till I was 15 or 16 years old, really. The first time I remember watching a television programme was when the Queen Elizabeth, I think it was her coronation in, I think it was 1952. That was the first time I saw television. And then when we got a television, I wasn't really that bothered about it, because I was just at work and didn't really watch much of it.
What kind of films did you watch?
It would always be an adventure or cowboy and Indian or thrillers, gangsters, action movies really, action movies. Yeah, black and white on and...
What entertainment did you have?
Before television, when I was growing up, well, we sort of came home from school and we had homework, and then we'd go out and we'd play. We'd play either on the streets, we'd play hopscotch, we'd play hide and seek, we'd build things, we'd build bikes, we'd build buggies with four wheels that you could be pulled along with a rope and have good fun on and go down hills on them, and because there weren't as many cars in those days. So yeah, we were more inventive. We made things and we played out and we went fishing, and so summer and winter, lots of outdoor fun. We really enjoyed it. And when it went dark, we had to go in and we used to listen to the radio, of course, in those days, and there used to be lots of serials on that. I think there was one called Dick Barton, Special Agent, and he was a spy. And that was on every night from 7 o'clock to about 7:15. And it was very, very exciting to listen to on the radio. I know you can't imagine that now, but and there used to be comedy shows on that. All the comedians, they weren't on television, and they used to put great radio programs out, and we could listen to them at home with our friends and with our mums and dads, and we could laugh and chuckle at home because we didn't have television and video games. We didn't know, they weren't invented, so we had to make our own fun, and we made things and we built dens and hide and seek and all sorts of games. Had lots of fun.
What entertainment did you have at school?
It was seasonal at school, really, and when I was very young, the winters we used to be a lot colder than they are now. We used to have lots of ice, and we used to make big slides in the playground, and the bigger boys would have these slides that would be very long and very slippy, and they were good fun and quite dangerous, but the world wasn't quite so safety conscious in those days, so we used to play on the slides and throw snowballs, and We had conquer seasons. We used to play football in the schoolyard. We had teams, or small cricket and that thing. But everything was outside. When we had a playtime, you didn't stay in. The teachers used to just shift you outside, whether it was raining or not. Out you had to go, and it was that was it. Life was colder and whatever, and we didn't have central heating at home, and we didn't have fitted carpets in the house. We just had little mats, and yeah, it was good.
We walked. Most people walked in those days.
To Douglas?
Not to Douglas, to Aubrey School.
Right.
We walked to Aubrey School. When at 11, when you went to high school, we had to catch a train at 7 o'clock in the morning.
That's very early.
Very early. I had to leave home at 6:30 every morning.
Wow.
And walk about 2 miles to the railway station. Do you want to know what it was like going on the train?
Yeah, was it crowded?
Trains were always fairly busy. When you got to Douglas, you had another almost 15 minutes walk to get to the high school. And of course, because the train left at 7, we'd arrive in Douglas at 8-ish. By the time you'd all got off the train and messed around, as children do, and walked to school, it would be around about 8:30. So we were always some of the first to arrive at the school. And I can tell you that by lunchtime, 12 o'clock, we were starving. Absolutely starving.
Did you get lunches at school?
We could have school dinners, or just like you now, you could bring a packed lunch or you could have a school dinner. And I had school dinner.
Right.
And I could never understand how some of the children from Douglas would say, "Ooh, we don't like that." And I used to look at their plate and think, gosh, I could scoff that as well as my dinner. So one day we used to have a prefect sitting at each table.
Yeah. We don't have that now. We just walk
We
around
don't
in the
have
hall as
prefects,
prefects.
do we? Oh,
We
you-
have
you do
prefects, we
have-
just don't sit at the tables, we walk around,
Right,
so
well,
it's
we
quite
had
different.
one at each table. And one day this prefect said to me, "Could you have eaten that?" I had my breakfast at 6 o'clock this morning. And she said, "Well, you just eat it and take no notice of these children here, because most of them don't know what a cooked meal is." So from then on, if someone said they would take their meal and they'd say, "I don't want it, don't like that," I used to say, "Well, just leave it there and I'll have it after mine." Sounds awfully greedy, that, but when you've breakfasted at 6 o'clock, run 2 miles to catch a train, had an hour's train journey, another walk, got to school, you were ready for your lunch at 12 o'clock, weren't you?
Yeah, it would be. Did you have like a favourite toy?
I never had a favourite toy, but I had lots of toys. And one episode in my life, I remember when I was very young, was my grandfather used to give tins and cans and stuff like that to people that they used to call internees. They were prisoners of war brought over from England, Germans, and they used to collect these tins and cans, and they would take them away, and then a week or so later they would come back. They would come back again on their day out or their activities, and they would hand these toys that they'd made.
Yeah.
They were wonderful toys, so I accumulated quite a lot of them.
Did they break easily?
No, they were well made, and I played with them for years. And then we moved house, and we had to get rid of a lot of stuff. And I'm very, very sorry now that we got rid of most of my toys, which if I'd had them today, they'd be very valuable.
Yeah. So you don't have any toys now that you did have?
No, I grew out of toys very early in life, and I liked outdoor activities far more than playing toys and things. I painted a lot, I used to draw a lot, and I used to love doing that.
Did you have any like works of art that you
Not
think
works
you-
of art, but I did do quite well at school in the art, with art. And I remember my daughters, when they grew up and they were at school, I used to do their art homework for them, and they used to get good grades. So.
Yeah.
I went to Hanover Street School in Douglas, which is still standing today, but now used as offices. I lived just across the road where the car park is now. But even living across the road from the school, I could still be late from time to time.
Was there any consequences being seen without the correct uniform on?
Well, yes, there was. If you were caught without your hat, we used to wear a hat, a velour hat then, or a berry. And if you were caught outside school with your hat off or your tie off or anything like that, you would get a detention, a whole hour's detention on a Thursday.
Were your teachers allowed to cane people who misbehaved?
I didn't actually see anybody getting caned, but one thing I remember, you would get a rap over the knuckles with the ruler an odd time, and we had one teacher who had a thimble and used to walk up, a thimble on her finger, and she'd walk up and down the aisle, and if you lifted your head up from the book, she would tap you on the top of the head quite hard, which was very painful.
What games did you play at school?
We played lots of different games, mainly running around, tip, skipping rope, top and whip, film stars, which you used to guess the name of the initials. One person would give the initials to the other children, and they'd have to guess who it was, and then you'd run across the road, and first there would be the winner.
Did you always walk to school? If not, how else did you get there?
Well, I didn't have far to walk at Hanover Street, did I? Because I was just across the road. But when I went to Ballacameen, yes, I used to walk, unless it was raining very heavy, and then you'd get the bus. But no, Neil walked every day.
Do you remember your first day going into high school?
Yes, I do remember the first day, because we had to walk from Hanover Street School up to Ballacameen, and we were the first children at Ballacameen because it was only being opened, and the Home Secretary came over at that time to open the school. So it was all very exciting, a lot different from what we'd been used to at Hanover Street School.
Is there anything else that you remember about your school days?
What I remember about Hanover Street School was queuing up in the corridor every day for a spoonful of malt and a free bottle of milk. And we used to look forward to that very much, which I don't think they get today.
What was food like when you were a child?
Well, it was wartime, so the food was fairly basic. The food was ration. We had plenty of food in the Isle of Man. We had plenty of bread. We didn't get much butter. We only got a little ration of butter. But we had plenty to eat. We didn't see any bananas or anything like that. And sweets and chocolate were pretty rare, but we had plenty to eat, really.
Do you think life was better then or now?
Well, life was better for children in those days. We could go out in the morning. When we were on school holiday, we'd go out first thing in the morning, and we'd roam around playing, and we wouldn't be seen again until it started to get dark at night, or when it came to be time for Dick Barton on the radio, and we decided to go in to listen to that. But we did have a lot of freedom that children nowadays don't have.
What clothes did you wear?
What clothes did I wear? Well, usually when I went to school, I wore little shorts, ordinary pullover and a little peak hat. And when we were playing, well, we just wore our old clothes.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up at Mount Rule and the Strang in the Isle of Man.
What did you do in your spare time?
In our spare time, there was various things we played, and when the chestnuts were out, we played conkers, and after that there came a season when we played marbles, and then there came a time when we played with hoops, which were old bicycle rims with a wire to roll them round, all types of things like that, you know. We were quite fond of, it was during the wartime, and we played lots of war games where we had two separate teams, and we used to play quite rough games, really. Usually involved throwing pop bottles and things at each other, but nobody usually got too badly hurt.
Was school strict there?
The teachers were fairly strict. I remember we had one teacher, I won't mention any names, and she used to hit you with a bunch of rulers. I know one time she had me out in front of the blackboard explaining something to me, and I must have been a bit slow, and she got a bit mad and she bumped my head on the blackboard, but the blackboard came off the pegs of a hole and it fell down and it hit her on the head, so she wasn't very pleased. But some of the teachers were quite strict.
Where did you go on holiday?
Well, we didn't really go on holiday. As I said, it was when I was a child until I was about 13 or 14. The war was on and you didn't really go anywhere much. You didn't really go on special holidays. You just spent your holidays, playing around. When the war was finished, when my father came back from the Air Force, we did have a holiday in London, but, it was the mob money, but that was the first holiday we had,
When did you move to the Isle of Man?
I was born in the Isle of Man. I was born in Grebe, which is out towards Peel, Grebe. A little house up there by Grebe Bridge called Airy Thane Cottages. I was born there, and I lived at Grebe near my grandparents who lived at the house on Grebe Bridge, and then we moved to Mount Rule, which on the farm cottage at Mount Rule, and we were there a few years, and then we moved to the Strang when the new houses were built at the Strang, which was called Coronation Terrace.
What games did you play?
We played all the usual games, like board games, snakes and ladders, and all that type of thing,
What was the most popular sport?
Football was probably the most popular thing. Cricket wasn't quite so popular, but mostly football.
We had neighbours next door who went to school with us, and when we came home we'd go out and play in the park nearby, on the swings and things like that. When we were old enough, we had bikes that we used to go out and ride on our bikes, but mainly we would go to each other's homes or to the park and just play together, really.
What was the food like when you were younger?
Well, I think it was probably a lot more simple than we have today. There weren't so many things available, certainly no sorts of Italian food and that sort of thing. We're all used to pasta and rices and things now, which weren't available when I was a little girl. We had more straightforward diet, really. Our main meal we always had in the middle of the day, at lunch, what we would call lunchtime now, and it was nearly always meat and veg and a pudding of some sort after that. And then at tea time we would just tend to have like in the summer perhaps salad, in the winter something on toast for tea. More simple food really than we have now, and not such a wide variety. And I would say really everything was homemade. My mum used to make not our bread, but virtually everything else that we had she would make more or less from scratch. And things like milk and bread we would have to get fresh every day because we didn't have a fridge, so it would be fresh every day. We'd go to the shops and buy just what we needed for that day.
How has the education and discipline in schools changed?
Well, I think our school life was much more rigid in a way than yours is today. We all sat at desks in rows in the classroom, and you stayed at your desk really, and the teacher in the junior schools, the teacher taught the class the different subjects as they do today, but we didn't move around the school in the same way. The discipline, I think, was certainly different. I think perhaps today there's a more easygoing approach in the schools, but we had a very happy time at school. I enjoyed school, and we did lots of games and a lot of interesting things really.
How does the prices of foods changed?
Well, I suppose the food is comparatively more expensive now, but the whole financial structure is completely different, and people earned a lot less money in those days and had a lot less choice of what to spend their money on. So it's very difficult to compare how the prices have actually changed.
How did you wash your clothes when you were a child?
Well, we certainly didn't have a washing machine in the house. Everything was washed by my mum, either by hand or she had a wash boiler for sheets and things like that, and everything was washed in that. And then she had not a spin dryer or a tumble dryer, but a wringer, a mangle, and the clothes would be folded and put through that and then dried on the clothesline outside and ironed.
Did you have a phone when you were younger?
No, when I was your sort of age, we certainly didn't have a telephone in the house. The telephone, there was a telephone box quite close to our house, and if we needed to make a phone call, we would go to the phone box and use the telephone to ring the person. But mostly if the person you were ringing didn't have a phone either, like my sister, when she married and went to live in another part of the country, we had an arrangement with her that at a particular time, on a particular day, she would go to a phone box near her home and we would go to the phone box near our home, and then we would take turns of who would ring, and we'd have to wait for the phone to ring, and that would be my sister then. Apart from that, our only really way of communicating with her was by letter, which we did very regularly.
What was the most popular sport?
Well, I would say similar to today, most of the boys played football. The girls, usually it was tennis and hockey and things like that we played. Netball. I lived in Ramsey and we had a very nice open-air swimming pool. We all used to go to that when the weather was outdoor, so we used to go there, and that was quite popular as well.
How has fashion changed since you were a child?
Well, there's a much better selection of things for people to wear, mainly because I think of the better choices of fabrics and things that were available. People, and I think everyone dresses in a much more informal way than they used to do when I was a little girl. Everybody had quite formal clothes really, and you had your best clothes that you only wore if you were going somewhere special, to church or concert or something like that, and then we had our playthings. Yes, I think really we were much more restricted in what we had, and things were in some ways a lot more formal. We always, when we got in from school, the first thing we had to do was take our school clothes off. That was always the first thing we had to do, so that they didn't get spoiled.
You're listening to Tell Me on Manx Radio, a collection of interviews conducted entirely by children on the Isle of Man, looking back at the lives of their grandparents and other older relatives when they were growing up.
When I was living on the Isle of Man, I was brought up on the island, there wasn't a great deal of difference. I suppose the food was different, but I can't say we were greatly deprived. It was almost exciting to think of what was going on. I think the biggest difference was I simply didn't know my father until he came home when I was 6, and that created problems because I didn't know who this man was, and I think that's probably true of quite a few people who lived on the Isle of Man.
Was the siren scary?
I can't really say I remember it greatly on the island. It must have gone off. But I did spend quite a bit of time in London, in and around London, because we had family over there. And that was very different because it
it seemed more of an urgency to hear it in. And it was always wonderful to hear the wavery tones of the All Clear, which came at the end of the air raid.
Did any family fight in the war?
Well, yes, my father, Danny McGrath, who's your great-grandfather, he was in REME, Royal Electrical Mechanical Engineers. He was in from early days of the war, so he was able to get out that bit earlier because he was one of the earliest volunteers to fight in the war. So yes, he was injured, I remember, twice. I remember hearing about my daddy being injured when he was in Belgium, but before then, when he was in Egypt, because he was part of the 8th Army, who were generally known as the Desert Rats, who were fighting against Rommel in the earlier years, I think about 1942. And then when he was injured then he came back to Britain, but not to the Isle of Man, and then he joined in the Normandy landings and was also injured quite seriously when he was in Belgium.
Did life change after the war?
Yes, as I said, really, the main difference for me was that suddenly I had this man around the place. My father, and I lived a very quiet and sheltered life, living with my mother, and then with my grandparents. And then suddenly there was this man who came back and was quite a whirlwind in his personality. So yes, it was quite different. It took a bit of adjusting too.
What was the worst part of the war?
Well, I suppose it was growing up without knowing my father, so that when he did come back, he was an intruder. And I think if you read a bit about World War II, a lot of people felt that too. Who was this man who suddenly came in and started telling you what to do, because you'd never had this before? Also, I suppose, because as I said, we went away a lot. It was very different when we were across, and we actually went before my father went for the D-Day landings in 1944. My mother and I went away and we lived on a farm, McDonald's farm, interestingly enough, somewhere in Surrey, and my father used to come and see us quite often, so we had some relationship, trying to build a relationship up then.
Were high streets and shops busy like today during the war?
Because of rationing, you tended to go to the shops. You were registered, I think, with certain shops for food like sugar, butter, meat. My great aunt, my grandfather's sister, had a shop, and we used to go up there, and I used to help her weigh out, put the biscuits in the bags, weighed out a pound of biscuits, because they weren't packaged in those days. You had to weigh them out. And I also used to weigh the sugar out into the pound sugar bags, which were dark blue. I suppose we might have been we were a lot luckier over here as far as rationing was concerned, because I can't remember ever being greatly starved. We used to eat an awful lot of rabbit, because obviously there were rabbits for the killing in the hills. We ate an awful lot of fish, so I think we probably had quite a healthy diet over here. Like your granddad, I was aware of bananas coming in and being disappointed in them. But I also remember being told by my mother, you wait till the war ends and then we'll have chicken, not rabbit. And the first chicken we got, I actually said, oh no, I'd really rather rabbit, the flavour of rabbit. So it was all a bit different, but I can't say there was a big difference. Noticed more of a difference when we went to England, I think.
What were schools like in the war?
I didn't go to school in the war, although I should have gone, I suppose, in 1944-45. I didn't actually go because we were spending so much time across. My great-grandparents were in Kent, and we had to go and see them quite a bit. They were very elderly, and I actually was 6 before I started school over here, so I didn't really get the feeling of being educated during the war years, because I wasn't really. I picked up when I went to school a bit later.
What were your thoughts about rations, and how many were given out monthly?
I can't quite remember, but I know they were very strictly adhered to. And you know, you couldn't sort of get away with anything over the top, or certainly that's as I understood it, because I used to go shopping for my grandmother on a Saturday sometimes with the ration book. I particularly remember sweets being rationed, which I did think was grossly unfair, but I don't suppose that did our teeth any harm at all, having only be able to have so many sweets. And I do remember quite clearly when rationing ended as far as sweets were concerned. I can't say that I ever felt deprived of anything in the food line. In the Isle of Man we were lucky because at a certain part of the year, of course, there was a strawberry harvest, particularly down at Ration Abbey. They used, before the war, they had made a thing about strawberries and cream teas. And we always had jam on our table, and it was strawberry jam. And people who came from across couldn't believe this. But there was one little, perhaps amusing little anecdote about that. At the end of the war, when you could get more, rationing was off, when you could get more jam, I was told not to worry about only putting jam on one half of the bread in a sandwich. I could put it all over the sandwich because now the rationing was off. And I can remember thinking, what on earth would anyone want to do that for? It's perfectly adequate with just on one side. So I wasn't really greatly affected by rationing, I don't think.
How long did it take to get back to normal after the war?
Well, I think it was in the 50s, really. Certainly I can remember being at St Thomas's School in Douglas and going to a little sweet shop nearby with my sweetie rations. So I would say it was certainly late 40s, I suppose. I think it went on till about 1953 in some respects. But as we were probably lucky, really, living on the Isle of Man.
What is your most memorable time during the war?
Strangely, it's nothing to do with the Isle of Man. It's when we were visiting family in London and in Kent. I have a vague memory. I can remember a sound. I can remember a sound suddenly stopping. Nobody knew what it was. Everyone was looking to see what it was. I can remember being pushed behind a wall and a big bang and a lot of dust in the air. My mother told me years afterwards what I actually was remembering was we were not too far away from the first doodlebug which landed. I think we must have been in Kent, although we could have been in the south of London at the time, and the Germans were sending them over by rocket over the channel. And apparently we were aware of the very first one because then it was realised and publicised that when you hear a buzz and it stops, that's when you're in danger. You're fine while the buzz is on. It was like an angry hornet sound. But once it stops, you had to take shelter quickly. So that's my main memory, I think, of the war.
Before we finish, I would like to thank all the young people and their interviewees who have contributed so much to the first 2 years of the Tell Me project and given us such a rich collection of interviews. We've only been able to scratch the surface here today. And if you want to find out more, visit the project website, which is The Tell Me Project, that's all one word, thetellmeproject.com. In this programme, you've heard Rod Christopher talking to Abigail Christopher and Katie Gregory, Sheila Kelly talking to Callan Kelly, Anne Coleman talking to Anna Shaw, Jack Potts talking to Sammy Dilworth, Anne Duggan talking to Alex Stewart, Mr. Christian talking to Robert Johnson, Rosemary Kinraid talking to Rory McCann, and Anne Mather talking to her granddaughter Danielle Mather. In this last interview, George Whitelaw talks to Rebecca Bannister, and where many a seasoned professional would ask far too many questions and get in the way, Rebecca instinctively gives her guest all the space and time required to tell his remarkable story.
I had a very bad beginning because I lost my mother when I was 5 years old. She died in giving birth to my younger brother, and he lived, and she died. So I was without my mother for the best part of 12 years, well, 10, you give it 10 years, when my father remarried. It was partly successful, but it wasn't the same as not having your own mother. Yeah. Because when I was at school by this time, all my friends, when the school broke up in the afternoon, all my friends were going home to their mums, and I wasn't. I didn't have a mum. That was very, very hurtful to me. And that's why I'm so very conscious of the fact that my girls had their mother for a long time, you see. Yeah. So I got something in repayment later on for that. So I think that's all I can say about that.
So what school did you go to?
Oh, I went to Elder Park School at 5 years old, and that's when I was rather upset about the fact that I had no mother to go home to. And then my father moved his job to Glasgow, and I was moved to Hillstruss School, another junior school, only for a year. Then I was moved back to Elder Park School, and I went from Elder Park School to Govan High School. And when I reached 16, I left Govan High School and started my apprenticeship in a shipyard on the Clyde called the Clyde Navigation Trust. They were responsible for the maintenance of everything in the River Clyde, dockyards, ships, everything else. And it was a very interesting time in what we called serving my apprenticeship. And at the same time, I was attending Paisley Technical College in Paisley near Renfrew, taking the evening classes up to Higher National Certificate, which I got at 20. Well, the thing is that I was fortunate, because when I was a small boy, my favourite Christmas toy was a Meccano set where I made things. And the day that I made things up with spare parts and bits and pieces that moved, it was wonderful. Mm-hmm. My profession was my hobby, and that carried on into my seagoing and afterwards when I was in London for so long. So I was never at a loss. I was doing something I loved to do. And I always made a point of making sure that when I did a job, it was done right. And, you know.
So when you were on the sea, where did you go? And
I went to sea, 1932, I think it was, 1932, with the Donaldson Line of Glasgow, as junior engineer. And mind you, I was a junior engineer. You were the proper dog's body for all the dirty jobs. Anyway.
So what did you do during the war on the boat?
I was at sea all the time as an engineer during the war.
Were you taking supplies to and from England?
Every 5 weeks, double crossing of the Atlantic. I lost 2 ships, and we were picked up by the Navy and brought back to Oban in the west coast of Scotland. And again, I survived. Anyway, that carried on, and as I say, I was at sea when the war started. I was actually on board ship at sea a day out of Liverpool when the war started. I was home on leave, and I'm having a wee holiday with my wife and the family 4 days when the war finished in 1945.
So what medals did you have?
Well, the medals I had was the North Atlantic Medal, the General Service Medal, and the other one. The thing is that there was 3 service medals were bronze, and then 1 special when the war finished from the government, you know, it's a big one, you see, a silver one. The others are bronze. And then, as I say, 60 years later, they supplied us by giving us a special Merchant Navy medal, acknowledging the fact that we were part of the armed forces all the time the war was on, although we weren't acknowledged as such. We were listed as being non-combatants. How could you? We were in amongst it all the time.
George Whitelaw talking to Rebecca Bannister from St Ninian's High School, ending this special edition of Tell Me on Manx Radio with me, Mark Tiley. Thank you for listening, and thanks also to Penny Crichton, Chris Redman and Professor Hugh Davidson, who have all worked so hard to make the Tell Me project such a phenomenal success. May I wish you a peaceful Christmas, and here's to another wonderful year for the Tell Me project in 2010.